Running into Darkness. Chapter 1. The courtroom buzzed with tension. A palpable weight hanging in the air as Mr. Johnson, the hardware store owner, took the stand. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses, peering at the prosecutor with a mix of concern and disbelief. "Mr. Johnson, please tell the court what you know about the defendant." "Des," the prosecutor prompted, her voice firm yet respectful. Mr. Johnson cleared his throat. "Des is a good kid. Works hard at my store, never late, always willing to help out after hours." He paused, glancing at Des, who sat at the defendant's table, his eyes downcast. "He's like family to me." The prosecutor leaned in. "And what can you tell us about the night of the murder?" Mr. Johnson hesitated, the memory of that night weighing heavily on him. "He left early that evening, around 7. Said he had to pick up his sister. I thought it was odd. He usually stays late to help me close." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The prosecutor continued, "Did he seem distressed or angry?" "Not at all," Mr. Johnson replied, shaking his head. "Just rushed. I thought maybe something happened at home, but he seemed fine when he left. I can't believe he'd hurt anyone. Not Des." The prosecutor pressed on. "Were there any signs of trouble in the store that night? Any unusual customers or incidents?" Mr. Johnson's brow furrowed in thought. "Nothing out of the ordinary. Just the usual. Des is a well-respected kid in this town. Everyone knows him. I can't imagine him being involved in something like this." "Thank you, Mr. Johnson," the prosecutor concluded, taking a step back. The defense attorney rose to cross-examine. "Mr. Johnson, you mentioned that Des left early. Isn't it possible he left to avoid trouble?" Mr. Johnson leaned forward, passion in his voice. "He wouldn't run from trouble. He's not that kind of kid. If he was involved, I'd know. I've seen him grow up. He's a good boy." As Mr. Johnson stepped down, the courtroom's energy shifted. The jurors exchanged glances, weighing his words. The shadow of doubt lingered in the air. But one thing was clear: Mr. Johnson believed in Des's innocence. As the courtroom murmured with the implications of the hardware store owner's testimony, the prosecutor shifted gears, ready to bring in the next witness. The judge glanced at the clock, signaling that time was of the essence. "Your Honor, I would like to call Ms. Carter to the stand," the prosecutor announced, her tone assertive. Ms. Carter, the high school teacher, rose from her seat in the gallery. As she approached the stand, a hush fell over the courtroom. The atmosphere was thick with tension. The eyes of jurors and spectators alike were trained on her, each person eager to glean more about the unfolding mystery. "Ms. Carter," the prosecutor began as she settled in, "you were in town on the night of the murder. Can you recount your experience that evening?" Ms. Carter walked to the stand, her demeanor calm yet visibly shaken. She adjusted her glasses, scanning the courtroom filled with faces eager for the truth. Taking a deep breath, she prepared to recount the events of that fateful night. "Ms. Carter," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court what you witnessed on the night of the murder." "I was picking up my daughter from the diner," Ms. Carter stated, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "As I parked, I saw Des running past the entrance. He looked frantic." "Frantic?" the prosecutor echoed, leaning closer. "Can you elaborate on that?" "Yes," she replied, remembering the moment vividly. He was sweating, and there was a look of urgency on his face. It struck me as unusual. Des is usually so composed. What time was this? The prosecutor asked. About 7:30, I think. I hadn't heard about the murder until the next day. But at the time, I just thought he was rushing to get somewhere. The prosecutor nodded, urging her to continue. Did you see anyone else around? I did, Ms. Carter replied. Mia was in the diner at that time. And I briefly spoke with her before heading inside. She was there to pick up food for her siblings. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. The prosecutor pressed on. Did you notice anything about Des's demeanor? She hesitated, then said. He looked angry, and when he passed me, he didn't even stop to say hello. That's not like him at all. Did you hear any arguments or see any confrontations? The prosecutor inquired, her pen poised over her notepad. No, nothing like that, Ms. Carter admitted. But after hearing about the murder, I couldn't help but connect the dots. I wish I had thought more about what I saw that night. The defense attorney rose, ready for cross-examination. Ms. Carter, you mentioned you saw Des running. Are you sure he wasn't just hurrying home? Honestly, I don't know, she confessed, her voice shaking slightly. It just didn't sit right with me. The defense attorney pressed on. Isn't it possible that he was simply worried about his sister? Maybe he had reason to be concerned? Ms. Carter nodded. Yes, I suppose that's true. But I still can't shake the feeling that something was off. As she left the stand, the courtroom felt electric with uncertainty. Ms. Carter's testimony added layers of complexity to the case, further complicating the murky waters surrounding Des's involvement in the crime. The whispers in the courtroom faded as Mia stepped onto the witness stand. At 18, she wore the weight of the past few days on her shoulders. Her eyes flickered nervously around the room, finally settling on the prosecutor. Mia, the prosecutor began gently. Please recount for us what you witnessed on the night of the murder. Mia took a deep breath, steeling herself. I was heading to the diner to pick up food for my siblings. My parents weren't home. And it was late, she began, her voice trembling slightly. When I arrived, I saw Des outside. He looked angry. Angry? The prosecutor echoed, leaning forward. What made you think he was angry? He was sweating and breathing hard, like he'd just run a marathon. I've known Des forever. I could tell something was off, she said, her voice gaining strength. He was arguing with Jazz, and I could hear bits of their conversation. It sounded serious. What happened next? The prosecutor prompted. I went inside to order food, but I couldn't shake off what I'd seen. While I was waiting, I noticed Lily come in. She was acting weird too, looking around like she was anxious or something. After I got my order, I left the diner and walked home. Did you see Des again that night? The prosecutor asked. Mia hesitated, a shadow crossing her face. No, I didn't. But I heard about what happened later. I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. The defense attorney stood, a skeptical expression on his face. Mia, you said Des looked angry. What reason did you have to think he was involved in the murder? Des and Alex had a fight at school earlier that week. Des caught me kissing Alex, she explained, her voice trembling. I didn't think it would escalate to something like this. But I guess things got out of hand. I just don't believe he did it. He's a good person. The defense lawyer nodded, but the tension in the air was palpable. Mia's testimony added another layer to the mystery surrounding Des, leaving the jury to ponder the connection between the past and the present. As she stepped down, the courtroom was filled with a heavy silence. Questions lingered in the air, leaving everyone wondering who was truly responsible for the tragic events that unfolded that night. The murmur in the courtroom died down as the diner worker, Alex Reynolds, took the stand. He was a familiar face in town, known for his friendly demeanor and quick service. He wiped his hands nervously on his apron, adjusting his baseball cap as he faced the prosecutor. "Mr. Reynolds," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court what you witnessed on the night of the murder." "Sure," Alex replied, his voice slightly shaky. "I was on my break around 7:30. I stepped outside for a quick smoke and saw Des leaving with his sister, Jazz." "Can you describe their demeanor?" the prosecutor asked, leaning forward, eager for details. "Yeah, Des looked like he was in a hurry. Jazz was a little behind him, but she didn't seem scared or anything," Alex explained, recalling the moment vividly. "They were rushing toward the parking lot, and Des kept glancing back like he was worried about something." "Did you see anyone else at that time?" the prosecutor pressed. "I did. Mia came in right after Des and Jazz left. She was just picking up some food for her siblings," he said, pausing briefly to remember the scene. "I thought it was odd that Des didn't stop to say hi to her. He usually does." "What happened next?" the prosecutor asked. "After Mia left, I went back inside to clock back in. I didn't see anyone else until I noticed Lily coming out of the bathroom. She looked, I don't know, nervous, I guess." Alex continued, his brow furrowing in thought. "But honestly, I didn't think much of it at the time. It's a diner, and people come and go." "Did you notice anything unusual about the atmosphere that night?" the prosecutor inquired, searching for clues. "Not really. Just a typical night. It was busy, and we were all just trying to get through the dinner rush," Alex replied, shaking his head. "But later, when I heard about the murder, I couldn't help but feel like I should have paid more attention." The defense attorney stood, ready to cross-examine. "Mr. Reynolds, isn't it possible that Des was simply trying to get his sister home? Why do you think he seemed so rushed?" "Yeah, that could be true," Alex conceded, glancing nervously at Des's family in the audience. "But after hearing everything, I feel like he was worried about something more than just getting her home. You know?" As Alex stepped down from the stand, the weight of his testimony lingered in the air, the courtroom buzzing with whispered speculations. His observations added yet another layer of complexity to the case, leaving everyone wondering about the true nature of Des's involvement in the crime. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the town drunk, known simply as Charlie, shuffled to the witness stand. A faded baseball cap pulled low over his eyes and a tattered jacket hung loosely on his frail frame. He cleared his throat, his voice gravelly from years of neglect and alcohol. "Charlie," the prosecutor began, "please tell us what you witnessed on the night of the murder." "Sure thing, pal," Charlie replied, his speech slightly slurred. "I was out of the liquor store about 9 or so, you know, getting my usual. I ain't got much to do at my place, so I walk home. Kinda nice out that night, I reckon." He paused, squinting as if trying to remember more clearly. "Go on, Charlie," the prosecutor urged. "I was just minding my business." Sippin' on my bottle, Charlie said, holding up an imaginary drink. When I saw this kid runnin'. It was Des. He looked real frantic, like he was in a hurry. He almost knocked me over when he rushed past. What direction was Des running? The prosecutor asked, leaning in. Toward the diner, I think. It was dark, and I wasn't paying too much attention. Just tried not to spill my drink. Charlie chuckled dryly, but the laughter faded quickly. Anyway, I didn't think much of it at the time. Figured he was just in a hurry, like most kids are. And what happened next? The prosecutor pressed. After he passed me, I walked a little further down the road. Charlie continued, a frown crossing his face. That's when I saw it. A body, laying there in the grass. I stumbled back, thought I was seeing things. I knew it was bad. Real bad. The courtroom held its breath. You saw the body? Did you recognize it? The prosecutor asked. Yeah, it was Alex, Charlie said, his voice lowering. I didn't know what to do. I was scared, so I just kept walking. Didn't even want to look at it anymore. Did you see anyone else around the scene? The prosecutor inquired. Charlie scratched his head, deep in thought. Not at the time. I was too drunk to notice much. But later, when the cops showed up, I heard them talking about Des being a suspect. Thank you, Charlie, the prosecutor said, stepping back. As Charlie left the stand, the courtroom buzzed with murmurs. His shaky testimony added to the confusion surrounding Des's involvement, leaving the jury grappling with a growing web of uncertainty. The atmosphere shifted again as Mia stepped down and Lily took the stand. She was visibly nervous, twisting her hands in her lap as she faced the prosecutor. The courtroom fell silent, and all eyes were on her. Please state your name for the record, the prosecutor prompted. Lily Bennett, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Can you tell us what you were doing on the night of the murder? The prosecutor asked, leaning in, intent on her testimony. I was at home. But I couldn't sleep, she began, her eyes darting around the room, betraying her anxiety. I decided to go to the diner because I thought there might be people there. I needed to get out. Did you see Alex that night? The prosecutor inquired. Lily hesitated, her expression shifting. I didn't see him. But he was supposed to meet me. We had a secret relationship, and it was special to me. Then Mia ruined everything by kissing him 2 weeks ago. If she hadn't come between us, maybe I wouldn't have felt this way. A flicker of anger crossed her face as she mentioned Mia's name. I left because I saw Mia at the diner, and I couldn't stand it. She just had to show up and ruin everything. Did you confront Alex? The prosecutor pressed, sensing an opportunity. No, I didn't. But I wanted to, she said, her voice rising slightly. I was hurt and angry. I didn't know what I'd do if I saw them together. I just needed to get out of there. Thank you, Ms. Bennett. No further questions. The prosecutor concluded, leaving the jury to absorb the tension in her words. As she stepped down, the courtroom buzzed with the implications of her testimony, revealing the depths of her obsession and anger. The air was thick with tension as Des stepped onto the stand. His brow was furrowed, and he looked around the courtroom, his eyes lingering on the jury. He took a deep breath, determined to hold it together as he faced the prosecutor. Please state your name, the prosecutor began. Des Walker, he replied, his voice steady but laced with an underlying tension. Des, can you tell us why you left work early on the night of the murder? The prosecutor asked, leaning forward slightly. I had to pick up my sister, Jazz, Des explained, his voice firm. She snuck out to go to the diner. And I didn't want her getting in trouble when our mom got home. Were you in a rush? The prosecutor pressed, narrowing his eyes slightly. Yes, I was. I didn't want her to be out late without anyone knowing, Des admitted. I threw on some clothes and ran out. Now, let's talk about the fight you had with Alex at school. The prosecutor continued, flipping through his notes. What led to that altercation? Des clenched his jaw, recalling the heated moment. I caught him kissing Mia, my ex-girlfriend. I was angry. I confronted him about it, and things escalated. I didn't want it to come to blows, but it just happened. Did you threaten him during that fight? The prosecutor asked, his tone sharp. I said it wasn't over, but I didn't mean it like that. I was just angry, Des responded, frustration creeping into his voice. I didn't actually want to hurt him. Then, why were you seen running from the scene of the murder? The prosecutor pressed, his gaze piercing. Because I was trying to get to Jazz. Des exclaimed, his voice rising. I was worried about her. She was my priority. I didn't even know anything had happened until later. The prosecutor leaned back, gauging Des's reaction. But you were the last person seen near Alex before he was found dead. How do you explain that? I don't know. Des shot back, his frustration boiling over. I didn't kill him. I was just trying to get my sister home. I didn't even see Alex after the fight. The prosecutor paused, allowing the courtroom to absorb Des's outburst. And what about the murder? What can you tell us about that night? I wish I knew. I didn't hear anything. I was focused on Jazz, Des said, his voice cracking slightly. I swear, I had nothing to do with it. Thank you, Des, the prosecutor finally said. His tone softer as he stepped back. Des took a deep breath, relief washing over him as he stepped down from the stand. As he walked away, the tension in the room was palpable. The jury looked at him with uncertainty. And the implications of his words hung heavy in the air. The atmosphere was tense, charged with anticipation after Des's emotional testimony. Just as the prosecutor stood up, the courtroom doors swung open, and the sheriff strode in, his expression grave. Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption, the sheriff said, his voice steady despite the tumult in the room. He approached his daughter, Lily, who sat pale and trembling in the defendant's chair. Lily, please stand up and place your hands behind your back, he instructed softly. Confusion spread across the courtroom as the judge's gavel struck sharply. What is going on? The judge demanded, his brow furrowing, with tears streaming down his cheeks. The sheriff looked directly at the judge and the courtroom. Your Honor, we have just received new evidence. Lily's DNA was found on the body of Alex Johnson. A gasp rippled through the audience as the news sank in. Des, still reeling from his own experiences, exchanged bewildered glances with the people around him. I went home after being informed about the DNA. The sheriff continued, his voice cracking with sorrow. And I found a knife in her room. Small traces of Alex's DNA were found on that knife. Lily's face went pale, and she looked between her father and the people in the courtroom. confusion morphing into rage. No! No! He didn't love me! She screamed suddenly, her voice piercing through the heavy silence. He was in love with Mia. The courtroom fell silent as she turned to Mia, her face contorting with fury. Why can Mia have him and not me? Before anyone could react, Lily lunged at Mia. But her father was quick, stepping in and restraining her before she could reach her target. The courtroom erupted into chaos as the sheriff struggled to contain his daughter's rage. Lily, stop. You need to calm down, he urged, his own voice trembling with a mix of authority and desperation. Lily's struggles ceased for a moment as realization dawned on her face. I didn't mean to. I just wanted him to love me. Tears streamed down her face as the sheriff led her away, his expression a heartbreaking mix of disappointment and sadness. You're going to be okay, honey. We'll figure this out. As she was escorted out of the courtroom, the crowd remained in stunned silence, absorbing the gravity of what had just unfolded. Des felt a weight lift off his shoulders, his heart pounding in his chest. He was free. Des Walker, you are hereby released, the judge declared, his voice echoing through the courtroom as he turned to the jury. You are dismissed until further notice. Des could hardly believe it as he took a step toward freedom. The courtroom was still buzzing with shock and disbelief. But he was finally on the other side of it. As he walked out, he caught Mia's eye. She looked both relieved and worried, the weight of their shared past hanging heavy between them.